What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest, covering the Oregon Ducks for Sports Illustrated on Fan Nation. Joining me on this episode of the Ducks Dish podcast is my good friend, Stephen Blanchette. How we doing, Stephen? Thanks for being here.
What's going on, Max? Glad to be here as always. Thank you for having me. I am doing well. How are you doing, man?
I'm good. Another day covering the Ducks. Can't ask for much more. Got to talk to Dan today after getting that national championship with the Georgia Bulldogs. Kind of feels like we're tiptoeing in between like a bunch of different seasons. Like I was in football mode, and then we had early signing period stuff, so it was recruiting mode, and then now we have hoops again. So trying to kind of keep it all going here. Covering the Ducks. I am heading back to Eugene on Monday. So I'm excited to be back. Been out of town for almost a month now, so I'm definitely missing Eugene. Been able to travel a little bit, which has been much needed. But we got some stuff to get into, man. I know we had talked a lot about kind of the transfer portal, news that we've kind of been seeing recently, and that's kind of where I wanted to start things today. But before I get into that, if you guys are watching on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres, thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's show. Definitely hop in that live chat and ask any questions that you kind of want us to tackle. Stephen and I always enjoy hearing from you guys and seeing what you want to talk about the Ducks, because a lot's happening right now. So all that being said, if you guys are here live, thanks for tuning in. If you're watching on the replay, let me know what some of your takeaways were from Thursday's press conference, because Dan Lanning certainly had a lot to talk about. So, Stephen, what I was talking about, kind of alluding to earlier, is transfer portal stuff. Kind of the two big names that we're keeping an eye on right now is Trey Benson and Sean Dollars. Both running backs. We can start with Dollars because I think that's kind of the fresher news right now, because he's kind of been in and out, and then he finally, broke his silence, if you want to say, and I set the record straight on Twitter. I have his tweet right here that I can just read, and then kind of want to get your thoughts on how everything's kind of been happening. He said, after talking with Coach Dan Lanning, I've decided to take myself out of the transfer portal and stay at the University of Oregon. I'm fully committed to putting my focus on the team and seeing everyone in Autzen this upcoming season. #GoDucks. What do you think of that, Stephen?
I think it's interesting on a lot of levels. First off, with how everything has been going with him being kind of in, like you mentioned, in and out. So it sort of reminded me of the situation we had with Seven McGee a couple weeks ago, where he said he was going to transfer, said that he wasn't going to transfer, but then we had that additional flip-flop. And at least from his tweet, he said after talking with Coach Lanning, so it makes me think maybe he hadn't had a conversation at all with Coach, or hadn't had a real substantive one. So that was my first thought, is that, again, Coach Lanning, it seems like when he talks to these players about what their potential is and what they can accomplish here at Oregon and buying in, seems like he's hitting the nail on the head most times. The other aspect of it is what it means for the future of the running back room, right? So originally, when I thought that he was transferring, or when he said he was in fact going to transfer, then I assumed that either Dye or Verdell is going to return, and one of them wasn't going to go to the league, because then that would make it so that that running back room is that much more crowded. But now, with him returning, now I'm thinking potentially the potential is a lot higher for both of those guys to be entering their name into the NFL draft and not returning. So those are the initial kind of thoughts I got from it. It could mean a million different things. It could mean none of the things I just said. What do you think, Max?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely easy to kind of infer or speculate about kind of what this means. I feel like unless a lot of these guys go on social media like Sean Dollars did, we don't 100% know what really happens until a coach lets us know. So I think that to kind of backtrack a little bit, when Trey Benson initially put his name in the portal, reports, he didn't announce that on social media. That was reports coming out. I think the first one I saw was Matt Zenitz at On3, so that's kind of the reports that we're citing here. Mainly, he's been doing a great job tracking a lot of transfer portal stuff throughout the offseason. So Benson hit the portal after Dollars did, and then when I saw that, I kind of thought, kind of like you were saying, it made me think, okay, probably one of those two guys in Dye or Verdell is probably coming back. I think right now I'd probably say I would feel more confident about Dye.
Agreed.
Just because, I don't know, this makes a lot of sense to say, but like, in a way, I feel like he's more invested in the program. But insofar as his brother went there,
Mhm.
he's there. They got to play there at the same time. The whole Men of Oregon type of deal. I feel like I could see a little bit more. That kind of makes me think that he may be a little bit more likely to come back. And with Verdell, I mean, he's been a great back for the Ducks, but he's played so much football and he's gotten really banged up. I just don't see for him, if he's obviously, like a lot of these guys are, hoping to ultimately end up in the NFL, kind of what you think about, um, you know, trying to come, like what benefits do you really have of coming back for another year? So that's kind of what I think about those guys, kind of, where they might stand, because we're still kind of waiting to see those decisions. Like, that's one of the updates that we got today, I guess, was that there isn't an update, rather, from Dan Lanning, because he was asked about those specific decisions, and he's saying, I don't want to put any timelines on specific guys. Those are all personal conversations and decisions that they're going to have. And he's really, putting it in their hands, and letting them make that announcement, knowing, when they're most comfortable.
Yeah. And, with the NFL process, those guys all have the benefit of getting a grade sent to them, right? About where they're potentially going to end up. So that's one thing that these guys are probably waiting on here, is to get that initial grade. Another thing is, like you mentioned, CJ Verdell has got a ton of tape already. So he doesn't really have much more that he needs to put on film. He did have that injury against Stanford, and that's not just a little tweak that he was, just fighting to come back from for the rest of the year. That's a serious injury that he dealt with. And as a running back, I hate to use this word in the NFL, but it sort of seems that way unless you're elite. Running backs are sort of disposable in the NFL. And as everybody knows, every pick you go down in the draft, so does your monetary value of your first contract. So with CJ and that injury, I would be, I would put my money on him probably being the one that, if the decision is, one of them's going to stay, one of them's going to go, he would probably be the one to go for those reasons I just mentioned. And then with Travis, this is his first year to be able to really be the man if he does stay, which I think would be enticing for him in terms of him being a program guy, like you've said. I mean, he's been here a long time, but he's never been the man, the number one guy, which he clearly would be next year if he returned in that running back room. So, but again, with Sean Dollars returning, it sort of makes me think that both of them are leaving. But I think those grades are going to be big. Everybody who watches the Ducks knows that Travis probably needs to put on some additional size just to make sure he stays healthy in the NFL. But it's going to be interesting to see what these guys decide to do. And Lanning, like you said, Lanning didn't provide details, but I think he was honest. Like, there's a certain timeline for every one of these players, again, because they've got to get their own grades, talk to an agent, talk to their family, see what's really best for them. At this point, it's not really what's best for the program with how long they've been involved. So it really is what's going to be best for their situation and their draft stock going forward.
I want to go back to what you said about, Travis Dye being the guy, because I feel like we actually did get to see that this year, right? CJ goes down, and then a lot of people were wondering, okay, what's this offense going to look like with Verdell definitely being the lead back? I think, I don't want to say I'm completely innocent of, kind of questioning what's it like. I never questioned if he's going to be able to do it, but I was curious about what it was going to look like, right? Because, a lot of people want to, knock him for his size, listed on the Oregon website at 5'10", 190, but he was running between the tackles. They were giving him tons of carries, and then ultimately ended the year with 211 rushes for 1,271 yards and 16 rushing touchdowns. And then I think he dipped a little bit in the receiving category, I believe. I don't know what his stats were last year, but 402 yards and 2 touchdowns on 46 receptions. So I think we do know kind of what it's going to look like there. But I kind of wanted to transition that topic a little bit, since we're talking about the backs, into just, I feel like Oregon has had a running back problem for years now. And when I say problem, I don't necessarily mean problem. It's just, there's always so many talented backs. You constantly, year after year after year, you're wondering, well, where are these carries, where are these touches going to come from? And that was definitely going to look, it was definitely hard for anyone else to really get involved at the start of last year, right? Because Verdell and Dye just were really that 1A, 1B type of deal. And then the Ducks are playing a lot of games really close, like we've talked about before, Stephen, which makes it hard for younger guys to get involved. But now, just based off of what we know, I think that the there's a lot of excitement and intrigue in this running back room because Cardwell really came into his own last year. He got the biggest workload out of any of the other backs. And then Seven McGee has obviously shown how special he can be, whether it be running or passing. But I don't think if you're Oregon, you don't necessarily want to be in the situation where you only have Cardwell and McGee. I think it's nice to have because then you only would have had 2 scholarship backs if Dollars did indeed stay in the portal and then end up finding a new home. But because Cross Patton, for people who didn't see, he's going to be transferring to Nevada to follow Ken Wilson. And Ken Wilson in Nevada has just been cleaning house in the portal with, some former Oregon players. So wishing them the best. But now that Patton's gone, if Dollars didn't end up taking his name out of the portal, you got McGee, Cardwell, and Aaron Smith. And then I'm sure there might be some other walk-ons on there that I'm unfortunately not remembering. But man, I mean, having Dollars back is super big because I think in the 2020 season when Verdell was hurt, we did get to see some flashes of kind of what he brings to the table. And I think that there's still a lot of possibility for him to, really make an impact here at Oregon.
Yep. Yeah, and I should have clarified earlier. What I meant is when we hadn't gotten the chance to see Travis be the man is that by plan, we hadn't seen that. Okay, so
Sure.
he was thrust into that role, right? And I think actually that might, with what we saw, that could entice him to come back. But at the other flip of the coin, he played so well, it could entice him to go to the league, right? Like, look what I can do as a lead back. I mean, 16 touchdowns. The guy was phenomenal this year. I mean, in my opinion, clear team offensive MVP. So he had a phenomenal year. So we'll see what happens with that. You're right with Oregon and having that problem, right? It's a great problem to have. I think, in my opinion, what you always want to have 4 backs in somewhat of a rotation, right? You want to have the guy and then potentially the pass catcher guy, the long yardage guy, and you've got 2 interchangeable dudes behind that. But again, with running backs they get the rock so many times, their bodies take more hits than anybody else. And so you've got to be able to have people that can step up. We saw that with Oregon last season with Verdell going down. Not only was it the classic Oregon next man up mentality that we all know well, but it was just a sign of how talented the roster is, right? Cardwell came in and it was like he didn't miss a beat immediately. And, that's a credit to the culture of this team that not only Cristobal built, but that the Oregon program has with, next man up. But at the same time, it shows how much talent and depth they have in that running back room. But when you have talent and depth in a running back room in a transfer portal where, you've got no reins on where people can go, then yeah, there's going to be people that need to get their touches somewhere else. It's like you said, there's only one football with Nix or with whoever it's going to be at quarterback next year. I think a lot of Duck fans want to see the rock in the air more than it was this past season too. So that takes touches away. So all those things are things that those guys need to consider because regardless of where they do end up, they all come to Oregon with NFL aspirations, especially on the offensive side of the ball, where you're going to be potentially getting a lot of touches.
One more thing I wanted to add, Stephen, just on the running backs from what we heard with Dan Lanning today and kind of the recent news that we've combined kind of that as our opening topic here in this episode. It is what Lanning said about the backs. He said, "I'll say this: I'm excited about the group of backs that we have. We'll continue to be aggressive in finding guys that can enhance our program and make us better. But I think that a lot of those guys will be a part of what we're doing moving forward." So I don't know. I mean, depending on what happens with Dye and Verdell, maybe we see the Ducks added back in 2022 because, you'll remember that Mastro said that typically we only do 1 back a year, but in the 2021 cycle, the most recent cycle, they took both Cardwell and McGee. So maybe they go into the portal and get somebody. I think that could be, something reasonable for them to do with Dollars being a 2019 guy, but someone who really hasn't seen the field too much.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's something that I would necessarily prioritize and say is super critical. I think, you want some experience at some of those other positions, like, in the trenches or certainly at quarterback. I think that you can kind of get away with having some more inexperience at running back, but with the way that Cardwell played last year, I'd be super confident having him out there as RB1, based off of what we saw last year.
Same here. Again, the kid didn't miss a beat when he got into the game. He performed, well the entire season. He was a threat every time he touched the ball. I think throughout the entire conference or press conference that Lanning had this afternoon, he was expectedly pretty cagey about specifics within the portal, right? And specifics about player situations and stuff like that. And that's how every coach is. But I think he did go back numerous times to highlight, obviously, that they're going to utilize the portal as any team would do in trying to plug holes in the roster and bring in the best talent that they can at every position to win games. But he seems very genuinely focused on the roster that they have now, which I think is extremely important. And again, has been proved a few different times now with Dollars, with McGee, with convincing some other guys who weren't thinking about transferring, but thinking about going to the NFL to come back. So he's clearly focused on the guys that he's got in, in Eugene already right now, which he should, because it's such a young and talented team. But at the same time, he talked about how, he's in the tunnel after the game, confetti falling down on him, and he's FaceTiming with a recruit. So clearly the guys, we all know he's an incredibly savvy recruiter, but he's been, neck deep in recruiting for Oregon while he's been at Georgia the last few weeks. And it was clear as soon as the final, whistle sounded, he was immediately back into recruit mode for Oregon. So I think that he's spreading around his attention where he needs to do it in a pretty good way in terms of making sure he's hitting every important aspect: transfer portal, guys on the team right now, and future recruits.
So yeah, staying on that topic, we got our first comment of the show. Definitely want to get your guys' comments up here. So this one comes from Mike. Thanks for tuning into the show, Mike. Mike says, I like Lanning's focus on the guys in the current locker room, build the culture from the inside out. And that really just goes back to one of the big focuses like you were talking about, Stephen, and today, and finding, those guys that you already have on the team that you ultimately want to retain on your team. I'm trying to find the specific quotation here because he was asked about a couple guys who we haven't seen like most of last season, like Lance Wilhoit and Jarrett Greenfield, and then asking about the upcoming decisions for Karsten Battles and DJ Johnson. But this is what he was kind of talking about because he got asked about like numbers and he wants to play that pretty close to the vest. So this is what he said. Had to say on that. He said, our number one job here is still retention of the guys that we have, but we're in the field of acquisition as well. So we'll look at the portal. We'll look at opportunities for high school players and junior college players that can enhance our progress as we move forward. But as far as specific numbers, he's not going to get into that right then. So I think that's definitely something that I think helps put into perspective why we haven't maybe seen like an explosion on the recruiting trail like some people maybe would have expected. I mean, the attrition that we saw was insane, but to expect like a really big, quick turnaround on the recruiting trail maybe isn't realistic, at least given the timing. Like now that this staff is assembled, like that's something that I think I'm really down to talk about later, Steven, is like, I really think that they could potentially meet or exceed where Cristobal had them, in the recruiting rankings. But I think that some of the reason that we haven't seen as much action on the trail is because he's getting those guys that, man, we really haven't seen too much of in Eugene yet to stay. Sean Dollars is a perfect example. We've hardly seen what he can really do. 7, we just got a glimpse, but those guys were people that, kind of, had that moment when you kind of just had to sit back and say, okay, I've been here for X amount of time, coaching transitions, definitely no easy thing to go through. Maybe I got to take my talent somewhere else. But I think that that's, a great point here. Like you just can't understate how important it is for these guys to stay in Oregon.
Yeah. And I mean, when you're using the transfer portal, you're using it to plug holes in the team, but you want to have as little holes or the least amount of holes to plug as possible. And so you've got to just focus on the guys you have and see. That's the only way you can use the portal effectively, is seeing where you've got those needs. And that takes some real deep assessing of your current guys that you've already got. So that's 1. 2, in terms of culture, a lot of these guys, I'm sure and it's not just with Lanning, but anytime a coach leaves and a new regime comes in, it's like, well, I wasn't one of this guy's recruits. I wasn't one of his guys. Like what was told to me and my family in my living room is potentially not going to be what happens here for the future of my career if I stay here. So what does it look like for me? Now extrapolate that across every single one of the guys here in the locker room, right? They've all got their own goals of what they want to do here. So him doubling, tripling, and quadrupling down on the fact that he's focused on the guys here, I think is really important for that culture, because it shows the guys that, okay, it doesn't matter that he didn't recruit me. He knows that I'm a talented football player and he knows that I can contribute to this team. So I'm going to buy in to his process as well. And that's what kind of makes it so that those guys aren't hemorrhaging to leave. Like, obviously, like you mentioned, there were some people that left after Cristobal decided to go to Miami, both on the current roster and recruits. But it was not the hemorrhaging that I was a little worried might happen in the coming weeks after that. So retention has been huge for him. And the retention also goes to the recruiting side, right? Like, we haven't lost, like I just mentioned, we haven't lost a ton of numbers on that side. And so I think all of it sort of goes back to his culture and his ability to sort of realize what's in front of him right now and being able to maximize the talent that they've got. And, when it comes down to it, he's got to be cagey about that stuff. He can't be giving details about these conversations he's having with players about their intentions and where they might go and what their goals are. I mean, where would the trust be with the building at that point? So he's going to be cagey about that stuff naturally, but overall, his focus on retention, I think, is going to bode really well. And again, like you mentioned, Cristobal had this team rocking in recruiting rankings. It's an incredibly talented roster. But I think the potential here with the staff that he's assembled and just his natural, clear recruiting ability that we're seeing right now and his energy, I think they can blow the top off the thing. I think they can get consistent number one classes in the Pac-12 and getting up there in the nation.
Yeah, I think that going into that top 5 territory is really that next step that they need to take. And I've talked a number of times about getting out into Florida, so I don't want to repeat myself too many times there, but that's a point I'm still very passionate about. We have another comment here from No Quarter Tie. He says, I love how he strategically pulled coaches and play callers from a wide variety of conferences, expanding the Ducks' recruiting reach. This kind of goes into one of the questions that I actually asked him today, so I think that this relates pretty well. I was asking him about, how he went about finding that balance between the NFL and the college, ranks. Like, how do you kind of go, like, just some perspective on that? And he was saying, I really feel like here at Oregon, we can go and pull from the best of the absolute best. And just because, I wanted to get a good blend of the NFL, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but we get a good blend of the NFL and the college ranks. We don't have to sacrifice, one for the other as far as, where we get the experience from. He reiterated rather that he wanted to get guys that were good recruiters and good developers of talent. And doesn't feel like there's going to be any drop off there. So I think he got a really good mixture, just like, this comment is saying, of guys from across the country. You got people with really good West Coast ties like Tosh Sapoy and Demetrius Martin. Demetrius Martin's been all up and down the Pac-12. And then you have, Adrian Clem, who comes over from the Pittsburgh Steelers. You have Wilson Love, who's a strength and conditioning coach who has ties out there in the South. And then Carlos Lachlan, who is at Florida State and Western Kentucky. Like, they're just all over the place. It's just incredibly diverse staff from their experience. You have guys that have had off-field roles as well. I feel like I read something about Lachlan being a strength and conditioning guy at one point. So you just have people, I think, that have done a bunch of different things, worn a lot of different hats. I think Tony Tuoti, he was a guy who has some experience in the recruiting department as well. So it's really coming together, and I don't want to hype it up too much because we still haven't seen anything as far as an on-field product goes. But I think we really know that recruiting is going to be big, and that's something that we're excited to see come together here.
Yeah, I think anybody who really follows college football understands that recruiting is not only the lifeblood of the program, but it's basically what gives your team the best chance of success to compete on a really high level, i.e. the playoff. I think the Michigan game against Georgia, against Lanning's old defense, was a really good example of that. Michigan's riding a dream season, looked like potentially a team of destiny, and all those 4 and 5 star guys running around in Georgia, it was just like men amongst boys during that game. And so that game alone, I think, was a really good representation of how important recruiting is. Now, Lanning has worked under guys who live and breathe recruiting every single second of every single day of every single season. They don't take a day off. Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, worked with Mel Tucker. That's just a short list of names. So he is well aware of the importance of it. And him bringing on a staff that also encapsulates or also buys into that mentality as coaches is that's pretty much their number one thing that they need to solidify no matter what. If recruiting is good, we can just build off of that. That's incredibly important and it's really smart. Um, so it's the surest way to set yourself up for success in college football is having a highly rated recruiting class. The guys who rate these guys are pretty accurate in terms of their skill level and where they're going to go. And so being able to realize that, okay, I'm coming into a situation where I've never been a head coach before, like how am I going to build this staff to make sure that I'm the most successful coach I can be and the program is the most successful as it can be. He's doing all the right things in terms of making sure every single aspect is covered, and the diversity of among the coaches is huge. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, kind of expanding a little bit too, but I think that's going to be huge in terms of being able to identify specifically for players' needs and goals as they're getting out of high school. He's going to be able to have a coach to plug in a conversation for every single one of those goals that each individual guy has.
Yeah, to go to that point, I think, the reason I am so impressed by this staff is because I think when he was initially hired, a lot of people were, talking about his youth and how he hasn't been coaching for a super long time compared to maybe some of your more seasoned veteran coaches. So they might have been, a little bit, I don't know if I'd say pessimistic, but maybe a little bit, cautious about, who is he going to be able to attract? I think I was writing this earlier today, kind of along the lines of this, like, great players want to play with great players. And I think good coaches want to coach with good coaches. And, we're seeing him attract a lot of big name coaches. Which I think chief among them, Tosh Lapoy and Demetrius Martin are some of the ones that stand out to me the most. Like, I don't really think that he obviously had a connection with a lot of these guys before, but taking a swing for some people that he maybe didn't have connections with, I think says a lot about him just, really leaning into that Oregon brand, right?
Yeah.
Like who wouldn't want to coach at Oregon? There's only a handful of programs in college football that I think you can really, dangle in front of people. And they're gonna, flat out not have much hesitation, saying, "Oh yeah, I'd go to Bama over Oregon, or I'd go to, a Georgia or a Clemson." Clemson's been kind of down, so maybe not the best example lately, but I think you get my point. So he's definitely still, gotten some really big hires.
Yeah, and again, that kind of goes back to the diversity of just the staff in general, but also like geographically for diversifying that, right? And so, like you mentioned, Oregon's got some of the top facilities in the country, rivaling any school in any conference, SEC included. But everybody on the West Coast knows that. But you and I have talked offline about this. Like, not everyone really understands that. They know the Oregon brand, they know Nike, they know the flash, they know the swag, but they don't see all the stuff in the background that goes into that as well. That is part of that and what makes that brand even more special. And so having people that are able to go into so many different corridors throughout the recruiting game, and be able to speak to so many different levels of experience. I mean, he mentioned it. One of the quotes he had: the two biggest things he's looking for in coaches is relationships and development. Right. So relationships, recruiting, development, making your talent better. So obviously, those are the two things that are going to make you have the best chance to win. And then he's talking about, in terms of where he's getting these guys specifically. I think it was important that he mentioned, like, yes, some of them have had really high level college experience. Some have had really high level NFL experience. Some of them haven't had enough experience basically that any of you guys have really heard of, but I know for a fact that they're some of the strongest minds in football in this country. So the fact that he can identify that stuff and is, like you said, willing to kind of let go a little bit and not be as it doesn't seem like he's going to have his hands insanely in every single pot of every single aspect of the game. I think he's going to let his coaches coach, which, I mean, again, thank you to Mario for everything he did for the program. I love him, but I did think that he was way too involved in a lot of different aspects of the game and not letting his coordinators and his coaches coach to their best ability. So I really think that, again, it's early on, like you said, we don't want to ride the hype train too high, but it really seems to me that he's doing everything right in terms of being able to land the guys who are going to be able to do their job and do it effectively, and then develop players on the field. And that's what you ask of every player, right? Is just do your job every single play. So when you've got that potential symbiosis here, like, he's just been doing everything right in my book so far.
before we get to, we got a couple of questions and comments here about recruiting that I want to get to. But before we get to that, I think it's just, he talked about it today and it was such an underrated point. Like just talking about, he's like, we're really lucky to have the technology at our fingertips that we do. Like the fact that he was able to juggle both of these, like, I don't think anyone's really going to know what that was like unless they were in Athens or, in his family or something. Like the fact that he was able to prepare a national championship caliber defense all while assembling his staff remotely. I'm assuming that, he didn't have guys flying into Athens, because I feel like maybe that was the case, but he's probably not going to be able to, hey, I got to go, meet up with this coach, for a coffee to see if he can, if he wants to come coach with me at Oregon. But like the fact that he did it all remotely is just amazing. And I feel like the timing really fell in place and it wasn't rushed. Like, I think that was another big point that I liked with what we were seeing from Mario Cristobal, is every time a new hire had to be made, the fans could be clamoring for action, but he would always sit back and really be calculated and just vet all these guys to make sure that they were an ultimate fit for his team.
Yeah, agreed. And I think with his ability to digitally connect with these players, which has been proven, it only just gets me more excited for what's going to happen when he's out there full time in person on the recruiting trail. And like you said, the technology is huge. I don't think it wouldn't have been nearly as easy to be able to juggle both of those things at the same time. Granted, it's obviously not easy to prepare a national championship defense and to recruit for another school at the same time. But just going back real quick to that game, like, let's be real, Max, the Georgia defense won that game. Okay. The Georgia defense is the reason that they're national champions. And you didn't even, it's cool that he was FaceTiming with that recruit on the way out, but you didn't even need to be that guy if you're being recruited by Oregon to get excited about Dan Lanning. I think the performance on the defense, I'd like to thank everybody on the Georgia defense for their play that night, because I think it really just I think it did a bunch for Dan Lanning's, sort of status with people who, maybe didn't have eyes on the Oregon brand before, and now they do, because they saw that performance on the field and they're like, okay, wait a minute here. Let's see what we're going to have in Eugene next season with this guy at the helm.
Yeah, I think that just goes back to kind of what we've said about how, having a championship caliber coach now, they got to the championship, so you could still kind of say that it was along those lines, but it's only going to serve Oregon better to have a guy that has elevated the defense. And, we've said it a bunch of times, it's not just Dan Lanning. Like, Georgia has a bunch of brilliant defensive minds in that program, but, ultimately when you're looking at the piece of paper, it says Dan Lanning, defensive coordinator, or it did. So he's going to get a lot of credit that is definitely well-deserved there, building that Georgia defense. And then I wanted to get to the next kind of question that we had here. This one comes from Jake. Damon Williams Jr., is he an Oregon lean? He's a guy that was just on my radar today, tweeting out that he was going to be visiting Oregon this weekend. For people who haven't heard of him, I'm looking at his recruiting profile right now. 4-star quarterback, according to the 247 Sports rankings in the 2024 class, 5'9", 160 out of Basha High School in Chandler, Arizona. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's the same school where the Ducks got Cole Martin, the first commit in the 2023 class. And I think that, so I don't know any specific intel on him. Maybe I'll be able to talk to him after that visit, and maybe the Ducks end up offering him, seeing maybe Kenny Dillingham will be able to talk to him a little bit more and get a better feel for his game. But I think it's definitely good that you're bringing in, a guy out of Arizona, which is a state that's been incredibly kind to the Ducks in recent years. But the quarterback position is super, super important. I think that the Ducks probably aren't looking super far ahead 2024 as far as maybe like, I don't think anybody really has too many 2024 commits, but in 2023, that's definitely got to be a position that's going to be important for them. Some names to kind of keep an eye on. You got Pierce Clarkson out of St. John Bosco and the Los Angeles area. You got Jaden Rashada out of Northern California. He was on campus over the summer when he got his offer. He's a really top tier quarterback in the 23 class. Javance Tuapotu Johnson. He's another guy in the Southern California area. Those are just some names off the top of my head. So I don't know any specific intel on Damon Williams, but I think it's definitely good that they're bringing him in on campus to keep pushing into Arizona, and then furthermore maybe even capitalize on that connection with Cole Martin.
Yep. You mentioned it. Arizona has been a fertile ground for the Ducks the past few seasons. They've gotten a lot of talent out of Arizona, so crucial to keep that pipeline of recruiting going. I don't really know too much about Damon Williams's you know recruitment so far. I know he's getting a lot of looks from a lot of different Pac-12 schools. I know Arizona has been interested in him and is recruiting him pretty hard. Obviously, in-state product there. Saw Colorado's recruiting him as well. Getting a lot of looks. I agree. It's pretty early to say, but at the same time, with what we've got, who knows who's gonna be in that quarterback room at the end of this season. Bo Nix is, regardless of what happens in terms of his starting status or not, I believe he did say, regardless, it's going to be a 1-year thing for him being in Eugene. But you've got to think that if he does start, one of those other two guys that's currently on the roster is probably going to go. So that obviously opens up and kind of puts more light on that glaring, or it makes that need potentially a little more glaring at quarterback there in the future, especially if Nix does only stay 1 year and you've got one of those other two guys potentially leaving. So we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, 2 years of eligibility for Nix, I believe, but yeah, we'll see what happens, with him ultimately, and based on what happens in the quarterback competition, that was something that was discussed at length today. Do you have something that you wanted to add on that before we go to the next comment?
No.
Okay, cool. This comment comes from Soccer Gauze. Thanks for the comment. We still have to prioritize Cali recruits and own it as our own backyard. Yeah, I mean that you saw when Mario Cristobal was at Oregon, and he was asked about Los Angeles and the Southern California area, and he basically was saying that's home for us. Like you think back to guys like Keon Ware-Hudson, Mace Funa, Sean Dollars. They were all in that 2019 class for Oregon, if I remember correctly. They were just really getting into modern day, which is they're the national champions this year, which I think is pretty big. So it's definitely important for them to stay in California. Southern California has been a super important area for them, and really just the whole West Coast. I feel like Washington's starting to get some better players. I don't think Oregon's quite at that level as far as some of those other states producing talent consistently. But when those guys are available in state, you think about Darius Clemens, who the Ducks missed on this cycle, and we're in a great spot for before the coaching transition. You think about Tano Hufanga, who's on the 49ers now. Go Niners. He was another in-state guy that they ultimately missed out on. But I think definitely prioritizing California recruits is going to be huge. I think in this 2022 class, before there was a ton of change, Texas was actually the foundation for this class. They had 5 guys out there, but I think if history repeats itself, California is definitely going to continue and probably should continue to serve as the foundation for a lot of these Oregon classes going forward.
100%. You need to have your local area be your most, maybe not your most fertile recruiting ground, but it needs to be your most consistent recruiting ground. So that's something that you always need to have sort of shored up, and then you want to be able to pull the big name guys from other areas of the country. But you need to make sure that the guys who are up and down the West Coast are in your recruiting pipeline, are considering Oregon with whatever they're, with all the other schools that they might be considering. You need to lock that down first. So I agree, definitely that needs to be prioritized. But at the same time, we hit on it a little bit earlier. I think the coaching staff and the diversity on that staff in terms of experience and, where they've been, I think opens up the possibilities for Oregon to really tap some other markets that they haven't been as active in prior to that, or prior to now.
Yeah, I think expanding their recruiting reach is going to be huge. I think we saw, I think we're just seeing kind of a peek at what the national reach could really be under Mario Cristobal, going all over the country. Because once he left, I mean, you saw that national presence pretty much evaporate, which is not 100% a surprise, but it's kind of to be expected when you're in transition. They had recruits from Texas and Alabama all ultimately back off their commitments. Not all of them have signed elsewhere just yet, so maybe they can get back in the running for some of those guys. But I totally agree with you, man. Like, you got to keep pushing it forward and try to keep ascending those rankings. Got another question from Jesse here, which I think has kind of been talked about a lot recently, on Twitter and kind of in the Oregon Duck community. question is the Jake Long hire legit? He's supposed to be the inside linebackers coach, but aren't the Ducks fully staffed for on-field coaches? Just to kind of get people up to speed on this one, there was a report that came out from Jim Dunaway. He's a sports host over at Next Round Live. And I think so. He was the one that came out with this report saying, I'm told Alabama analyst and former Tide player Jake Long will be the inside linebacker coach at Oregon, joining Dan Lanning's first staff. Great first on-field job. So that was the tweet that went out that was ultimately kind of, starting these, the speculation about it, if it's true or not, because it did seem like Lanning's on-field staff was totally full. I don't know personally if, I think the number that was thrown out there was 10 as far as some on-field assistants and coaches. So we haven't gotten a press release. Oregon hasn't officially confirmed the hire, which has kind of been the process for a lot of these guys. We'll see reports from the Bruce Feldmans, the Pete Thamels, the insiders in college football that ultimately get confirmed by Oregon. Maybe once these guys finish their seasons, if they're coming from the NFL, like that's what happened with Tosh Lupoi. But what we can't say is that Jake Long has changed his Twitter profile to reflect everything. His header is Oregon football. He has an edit with him in an Oregon uniform now, visor and shirt. It says University of Oregon inside linebackers coach. But the biggest reason this is kind of confusing to people is because Tosh Lupoi was named the defensive coordinator and linebackers coach. So I think optically it looks legit, but we haven't gotten official confirmation from Oregon. So, not officially official, like we say with every story that comes out, confirming the hire.
Yep. And if I'm not mistaken, Max, correct me if I'm wrong here. Apologies if so, but I think that this would be Jake Long's first on-field role, right? He was mostly an analyst and a kind of behind the scenes guy. And so the way I sort of viewed it is, I thought the on-field position coaches were filled too, including Lanning. There are 11 that are currently, officially listed on Oregon's staff site. But at the same time, if you're looking to build an elite program and you can get your hands on an elite mind who's got aspirations to obviously get onto the field and have more of a, on-field sort of career trajectory, why wouldn't you maybe just create an inside linebackers position for the guy and let him just work? Like it doesn't matter to me really what the title is. He's clearly a really strong defensive mind. We want to get him on the staff. Just call him the inside linebackers coach. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but that to me, that was sort of the first thing I thought is that, okay, I don't really care what his title is. He could be, assistant to the assistant defensive coordinator as far as I'm concerned, but it's just, I think that it's a really strong hire regardless. So.
Yeah, so I don't know if I don't know too much about his background. I think it would be his first on-field job because I found him on the Alabama website as a player, and it said he was a senior in 2016. So he's still a pretty young coach. So it would make sense if it was his first on-field job. But I don't know how all the inner workings work with what kind of title do you ultimately need to give a guy? Can you just do an analyst type of deal? So I don't have too much to add by way of that. But I know we got a couple more minutes here, Steven. So I think I wanted to get on some of these questions and comments before we get out of here. This one comes from PSR Pete. His comment was, Oregon may not be able to duplicate the SEC/Georgia roster, and I agree with keeping current players that fit the system, but we saw there's quite a gap with Georgia, Alabama rosters and the Ducks. Maybe do you want to start with this one? I feel like I've taken most of the responses, so I want to give you a chance to kind of say what you think first.
Yeah, I would agree completely. We did really see the gaps between not just talking about the Ducks, but like I mentioned earlier, with Michigan and Cincinnati, the other two teams that were in the playoff, you saw the clear gap in talent on the field, on both sides of the ball. So it's clear that, there's a ton of really good, really, really talented and strong teams every single year in college football. But when it comes down to it, when it comes down to brass tacks, the highest rated recruits and the most talented recruits are the ones that are going to get you plays. I should say talented more than highest rated, because we can obviously have some 3-star guys coming in, kill it. Oregon's seen their fair share of that, but you really need to rely on that strong recruiting base in order to be successful. So it is a big gap. I think if Oregon, let's just say Oregon hypothetically had run the table this year, right? They probably would have gotten into the playoff. But let's say Oregon plays Georgia or Alabama. I don't think it's a close game. I don't think the Ducks pull that victory off. And so, yeah, I don't think it's gonna be overnight. It's not gonna be even 1 year in terms of recruiting, but Lanning's, I think, putting the foundation in place here for that in the next 3-4 seasons. Not only are they going to be the top recruiting team in the Pac-12, but they're at least trying to legitimately position themselves and seriously position themselves to be in the top 5, top 10 overall in the country when it comes to recruiting. So I'm encouraged by that clear sort of path that he's sort of starting to paint and trying to get people to, be aware of in terms of intentions. But yeah, the recruiting gap it's a tough one to sort of fill once you're behind the eight ball a little bit, which it sort of seems like everybody really is compared to Alabama and Georgia sometimes.
Yeah, you say behind the eight ball, and I think that Oregon still does have a fair share of work to do, cut out for themselves and catching and chasing some of these elite teams. But I think that the talent on the roster is already at a level where it's not like you're super reliant on like on the 2022 class. Like you want to have a good class, but thanks to so much of the talented youth that the Ducks already have on the roster, it's not like a make or break situation. And I think that fortunately for the Ducks, they're not going to be in the position where you have to have a lot of freshmen, get thrown onto the field and get thrust into significant roles like you did in 2016. There were some young guys. I think back to 2016 and 2017 when Thomas Graham was playing. He got thrown into the fire and he did pretty well, but luckily the roster's in a good shape where they don't need to knock it out of the park, and they're already addressing some needs that are pretty important in the transfer portal, like we saw with Sam Tamani and Christian Gonzalez and Bo Nix as well. So I think that the recruiting, the possibilities for that are obviously the foundations being laid. And now that the staff's going to hopefully be able to get to work here, Lanning was kind of alluding to that in the press conference, saying he's going to be able to get going here. So we'll see what ultimately happens. Getting things going a little bit more on the recruiting trail. But
and Max, one thing just to add real quick on that is I think it's just been really encouraging, and I've loved to see that Lanning hasn't shied away from those conversations and those questions in terms of where Oregon could be in recruiting. So he's not been saying just the generic kind of coach speak of, we know how important recruiting is and we're going to recruit, at the top of our game, blah, blah, blah. Like he's been specific about why he thinks he's going to be able to convince Oregon or people to come to Oregon. He's got a plan already in place. And I think that's really encouraging that he's got the confidence. He's not just out here talking a big game and then sort of going to let the chips fall where they may in recruiting. And I think he genuinely is going to get into the fights with the biggest of the big dogs when it comes to getting these big names in the next few years here. And I think Oregon's going to be somebody that's going to be on the lips of a lot of potential recruits that maybe wouldn't have considered in the past. And that's not to say that Mario was not an elite recruiter, because he was, and he clearly brought some fantastic talent into Eugene. But I think that the possibilities here are, like we mentioned earlier, I think they can get. I think that the potential is bigger.
Yeah, the potential is definitely sky high with recruiting. We could talk about that all night long.
Yep.
Before we get out of here, Steven, I did want to just hit real quick on what Lanning had to say today on Thursday about the quarterback competition, because I think a lot of people, I think the Bo Nix, transfer edition really kind of was seen as polarizing, right? You have some people who are pretty excited about it, but I think the general tone of the Oregon fan base is, some people don't, they're a little afraid that, they're like, oh, well, yeah, he worked with Dillingham, so I could see him just being given the job. But that clearly wasn't the tone of what we got today. Talking to Lanning, he was saying that it was going to be an open quarterback competition, and that they were really straight up and real with Bo Nix when they told him, ultimately had that conversation about him coming in there and committing to Oregon. And I'll read that and then kind of let you say your piece. He said, we were really clear with Bo, like, hey, you come in here, there's certainly an opportunity to compete, but we're really excited about the guys we have on our roster as well, and excited to see those guys come in and compete and go to work. So you see that with guys like Ty Thompson and Jay Butterfield, it sounds like they're gonna get a fair shot. So it's certainly nice to hear that as we start to head into the off season here with the winter conditioning program getting going with Wilson Love. I'm sure that'll be going really soon if it's not already going. And then ultimately in spring football, that's when they, start letting it rip and can really, show how competent they are with the playbook. And I don't think we'll see some separation necessarily in the spring, but certainly spring, fall camp, you have time to really evaluate that whole thing. And then, may the best guy come out on top.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he started off that answer that you mentioned saying exactly that, we were clear with Bo. We made him know that it is definitely going to be an open competition here. And Lanning's right. Competition does breed excellence. It definitely brings the best out of these guys who are already competitive by nature. So it's going to bring the best football out of these guys. But I thought it was sort of telling at the end of his answer there, Max. And I do want to hop on it or kind of point on one thing.
Sure.
He said, "What am I looking for? Leadership, work ethic. You don't get to just be a quarterback on the field, right? It has to leave the field, has to be exuded in the classroom, on campus, that we operate day in and day out. I think we've got a lot of guys in the group that can do that. To me, that says senior leadership quarterback is what that definition means. And so I sort of like perked up when I heard that because I don't know, it sort of just reminded me about the rhetoric that was used a lot with Anthony Brown this past year when people were kind of clamoring for Ty and people were asking Mario questions about it. It went back to AB's leadership and his experience and his ability to command the team and the kind of person that he is. And so with Lanning mentioning that at the end, I started thinking, okay, well, maybe he let something slip there, and Nick sort of does have, is coming in a little bit ahead of the other guys. There's obviously no way to really know, but I just wanted to bring that up as something that I sort of thought when he did round out the answer to that question.
Yeah, no, it's a good point for sure, and I appreciate you bringing that up because it kind of keeps us honest and makes us think, consider the whole, all the pieces of the puzzle, right? Because we did hear that rhetoric with Anthony Brown so much last season. That was kind of the constant, point of emphasis and kind of what they use to ultimately defend why they had Anthony Brown as the leader of the offense. But I think excuse me, I think at some point, it kind of the comes to the point in a coach's career, you know, that you got to take a risk, and ultimately, some of these other coaches have taken risks. You look at Tua coming in. That's probably the biggest example that people want to go to. Him coming in the national championship game. That's not where Oregon finds themselves, but I mean, I think with the way that their schedule plays out, we've already done some early stuff on that. Like if you can get, like, say Bo Nix does win the job, if you can get either Ty or Jay in and like the Eastern Washington game, I just want to see these guys on the field. Like I'm not even at the point where I want that. Like it's like this person has to win the job. I just want, we're going to put them in the position where they can get on the field and at least have a chance to showcase their abilities. Because clearly the spring game, spring scrimmage, fall scrimmages just aren't enough. They weren't enough, and we didn't. That's why I think part of the reason the staff doesn't know what they have, because there's no tape to watch.
Yep, Max, I think that's such an excellent point. First off, like you just said, with the staff, they don't have tape on these guys to watch. So if they're looking at tape, they have to look back at high school tape. That's not really that helpful for high level D1 football if they've been around for a few years. So you hit the nail on the head there. I think also it's it makes it so that the fans are going to be finally able to see what we've got, because that was where a lot of the clamoring came to, is the hype around Ty was there. And when AB appeared to struggle, which again, I think may now be a little bit more on the game plan than AB, but when he started to struggle, uh, people just wanted the new fresh thing. It wasn't like they knew what they were going to potentially get if Ty did get thrown in there. And so I agree. I just want to see these guys on the field. I just want to see them be in some positions to be able to, see what they can do against different squads and different situations and scenarios. So I would love to have them be in position to be able to all get some reps. I think that would only make the offense more successful, having to be able to have as many packages as possible and utilize these guys' skills accordingly. But yeah, on the fan aspect of it, I think that might calm, these fans down a little bit if they can actually see what we've got here, and then everybody can sort of make an informed, collective decision on in terms of who to root for and accepting of what the coaching decision ultimately is.
I have a kind of a two-parter that I want to hit here on these comments. So I want to read one comment and then put the next one on to kind of keep up while we keep talking about the quarterback discussion, because that's obviously one of the biggest topics in the offseason, right?
Yeah.
So Randy asked rather, do you think Bo Nix will help our quarterbacks in the long run? And then Trevor here had a good comment that I think kind of is a little bit more of my thinking on the matter. So Trevor said, getting Bo, in my opinion, is nothing but a win. He could be Joe Burrow, plays on fire. He could be JT Daniels, who challenges but ultimately loses, that competition. Because I think I myself was like, wow, Georgia got to the national championship with a walk-on quarterback. Stetson Bennett shut me right up at one point, with that crazy deep, corner end zone shot that was kind of a jump ball, but that was a really great play. I just think that you help out the guys in the long run because you have a guy who's played at a really high level, has that SEC experience, which I think, I'll be honest, I think is really, maybe people make too much of it at a certain point, but clearly we've seen how effective Bo Nix can be when he's at his peak. And I do really like the point here about plays on fire, because I think here's what I think with the whole plays on fire thing. Like when you're looking at Anthony Brown this last year, I think for as limited as a quarterback as he was, his deficiencies or his mistakes and mess ups, like they weren't the best football he was playing still wasn't at a good enough level to make up for those deficiencies. It's like, oh yeah, like, he had a 50-yard bomb on the run while evading pressure this game, so that made up for his pick last game or something. It was like just a lot of his best plays were coming on the ground, and you ultimately are looking at a guy, I think someone said in the comments, that offered more on the ground than through the air, and I think that that's kind of just something that we have to accept at this point. So I think that there's definitely some more potential there as a passer compared to Anthony Brown. You're talking about a guy who played at Auburn in the SEC versus a guy who played at Boston College in the ACC. So, I mean, I just think that comparison with Brown and Nix now, since they both came into the program and weren't originally recruited by the Ducks, is an interesting one. But I think it's really, this addition of Nix, it ultimately helps the health of the quarterback room.
I agree. We'll go back to Lanning's earlier comment again, that competition breeds excellence. So Bo Nix has a lot of really, really awesome experience on the field against some really, really high level defenses week in and week out. And he's performed overall. He's a really good quarterback. I think another big thing that's different that a lot of people aren't really talking about when they do that comparison you mentioned with Anthony Brown and Bo Nix in those situations is that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Anthony Brown had a coordinator that he worked with at Boston College that the Ducks then hired as their offensive coordinator. That's what happened with Bo Nix and Dillingham here. Is Bo Nix has played under the current coordinator, so that's one wrinkle that's interesting in that, maybe makes you think that Nix might have a leg up to start just because he's going to be more familiar with the system than Thompson and Butterfield are, even though they've been in the program here at Oregon longer. So I think that's a really interesting wrinkle in it, but. I truly do think it's going to be open competition. It is going to serve all three guys well. And you're right. I mean, if we're talking highs and potential ceilings here from that comment from Trevor, yeah, if he plays like Joe Burrow and throws 61 touchdowns, I'd love that. That'd be incredible. That would go down as the best transfer since Joe Burrow. But if he comes in and he's somebody like Daniels who pushes Ty or Butterfield to be the elite recruit and the elite player that a lot of people, including myself, think that they have the potential to be, or at least one of them has the potential to be, then I think Bo Nix is a great guy to bring that out of them, because he's certainly going to be pushing them harder than any other guy really on the transfer market that I can think of right now in that position. I mean, obviously Caleb Williams or some of those guys would be a different sort of discussion, but you get where I'm going with that.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you talk about Caleb Williams, I feel like it looks like he's probably going to end up at USC, I would think.
I think so too, yeah.
I think I saw a report that he spent some time with UCLA over the weekend. So
isn't DTR coming back though?
That's the thing though. Yeah, like with DTR announcing he's coming back, I mean, there's just been so much movement at the quarterback position, or at least headlines in the Pac-12. Dylan Gabriel was going to be the UCLA quarterback as far as, announcing his transfer there. And then he flipped to Oklahoma after Williams left, I believe. So there's just been so much movement this whole time, but it's like the Pac-12 quarterbacks are going to look a lot different. You have Jaden Delora going to Arizona. I mean, Jed Fish has just been balling out as a recruiter, and I think that as terrible as their season was last year, he's really setting them up for success this year, and they could look like a different team offensively. There's another comment here that I got really excited when I read it, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight it again. Trevor with another cool comment and question. So thank you for putting that out there and letting us have some cool conversation about it. He said, I'm stoked about the defensive coaching talent coming in. If they produce, Oregon could be Clemson and stand out to all other conference teams. Will they produce? So looking forward to the answer. I think what makes me so excited about the defensive minded head coach deal and a lot of the high profile defensive assistants that have been brought in, not only has Oregon been had a dominant defense when they've been playing their best. I think back to that 2019 year, a lot of the highest profile recruits on this team, on their roster rather, are defensive guys. So I feel like there's still even more room for them to be utilized. Like, just think of what last season would have looked like if we got to see a full season of KT, full season of Noah Sewell, full season of Justin Flo. And if there weren't, if Bennett Williams didn't get hurt, he wasn't a super highly rated guy as a recruit necessarily, but like, I just feel like there's still so much potential on that defense that still needs to be tapped into. So much potential on this, team overall. You look at the skill positions on offense with Chris Hudson looking like he's ready to, really just have a monster season. That Troy Franklin touchdown was awesome. Dante Thornton just blew by his defender in that touchdown he got in the Alamo Bowl. But I feel like it's not an overstatement or an exaggeration to say that most of the higher rated talent on this team lies on the defensive side of the ball. So, getting a new staff in here could just really help them, I think, utilize that, because Tim DeRuyter, I mean, just the biggest problem for me, I think, was getting pressure on the quarterback with the talent that they had on the defense, that was just not up to par at all. But it was kind of masked, right, by the turnovers that they were getting. So when the turnovers started coming down, it's like, okay, there's got to be something here. We're either getting after the quarterback or we're, making up for it with some great turnovers. And it got to a point where they weren't really doing either one. And, they ultimately ended up losing some games.
Yeah, you got to be able to rely on one of those two consistently, right? You can't have either falter off if you haven't been able to rely on one throughout pretty much the entire year. I agree. I think DeRuyter got a little bit cute when it came to sort of the kind of the coverages and stunts that they were running, especially when it came to rushing the quarterback. I am not an experienced football coach. Tim DeRuyter has much more experience than I do in depth in the game of football. But that being said, if I had Kayvon Thibodeau on my squad, he's pinning his ears back and rushing the quarterback every single time. He's never dropping back into coverage from defensive end position. Maybe if I put him as a linebacker, I would do that. But as rushing, leading on the edge there, I'm literally having him go in every single play to wreak havoc. There's no question about it. So I agree with you. That was a question that I had a lot. I was like, what's going on? And the injuries are a huge part of it. KT wasn't 100% the entire year. I saw some note somewhere. I forget where it is. I wish I could properly source it. My apologies. But I saw somebody say that of the 11 projected starters on the defense this season, prior to the season starting, that there was not a single snap played where all 11 were on the field. Not one snap. From a fan's perspective, being in the stands for that opening game against Fresno State and watching Noah Sewell and Justin Flo run around, create the turnovers that they had, it was art. It was defensive art. I was so excited. I had a buddy there with me who didn't know too much about the Ducks, and I'm just the whole game, I'm shaking his shoulder like, these guys are freaks. These guys are going to lead us to the promised land. And then Sewell ended up having to kind of anchor that defense without the help of a lot of those highly touted guys on the outside there to help him out. So I agree with you. The defensive talent is the driving force of the potential for this team, and Lanning is the perfect guy to be able to bring that out. If I was a defensive player for Oregon, if I'm Noah Sewell, if I'm Justin Flo, I'm licking my chops to get onto the field and get coached with Dan Lanning, seeing what those Georgia linebackers are doing, in the national championship game.
Yeah, and then to kind of wind down here, Steven, I think that I already talked about how there's so much talent on the offensive side of the ball that clearly was underutilized last season. You talk about if Dye or Verdell don't come back, how exciting it is to see what the Byron Cardwell offense looks like, or getting Seven McGee more involved, or even heck, get John Dollars more involved. Now he didn't play at all last year, and I think that I wonder how healthy he actually was, because we had kind of heard a little bit about coming back in November or maybe in the postseason for like a bowl game, but we really didn't see him at all. He was a guy that, when I'm going to these pressers, I see, him around the facility, always has a smile on his face, saying hi to his teammates and everything. So a guy that, is ready to play and obviously is clearly invested in the Ducks in his decision to come back. But the other point I wanted to kind of wind down with Steven was just, I think Jeffrey Boss is kind of a wild card on this team right now, because we don't know if he's going to go back to the defensive backfield in the secondary, because he played so well at linebacker. But it's nice to have him. I think that it's nice to have him there, especially when you're looking at, Justin Flo, Noah Sewell, Keith Brown, Jackson LeDuc, like just a lot of good names there. And then Verone McKinley leaves, so it'd be cool to see. If what he could do, in the secondary. And then DJ James still hasn't committed somewhere. I did see some screen grabs of his Instagram story of, looks like he was visiting Miami. So maybe he opts to follow Mario Cristobal to Miami. But like, he's a guy that I think the Ducks would really, really like to have come back. And that's a perfect example of what we were talking about, and how Lanning was saying, I want to keep the guys that are on this team. Like, we're going to go to war with the guys that are on this team. I feel like getting DJ James back, I think that would probably outweigh anyone that they could add on the 2022 on the trail right now, because a lot of those top tier guys are already signed. So we'll have to see what happens there, but I think that most of my confidence right now definitely lies in the front seven for Oregon going into next year, just because of all the attrition that they've seen in the secondary.
100%. And again, like I mentioned earlier, that was the highest touted part of this defense as a unit going into last season. Obviously, Kayvon was the number one draw individually, but if we're talking defensive units, it was that linebacking core that everybody was super excited to see. And they've got some young guys on that team too. I mean, today I was watching some Jonathan Flo highlights, right? I mean, like, they've got some young guys on the linebacking core as well that, if we can maximize the potential of this defense, it's going to be tough sledding for a lot of these quarterbacks here in the Pac-12 and other people that come into Autzen.
Before we get out of here, Steven, I mean, we've been going for over an hour here on this episode of the show, and I feel like there's still so much to talk about. Yep. So there's definitely going to be a lot of good, conversations with you and me and other members of the team at Ducks Digest. But is there anything else that you kind of wanted to hit on here from Lanning's conference today, press conference, before we call it?
Yeah, I mean, really, my thoughts from the press conference overall were just basically a continuation of the thoughts I've been having every time I see Lanning speak, is that I'm extremely excited about what he's bringing to this staff, his commitment to bring Oregon to real excellence. And honestly, Max, I think we have a real shot to get to the promised land here in the next few years. And expectations are sky high here in Eugene, as you know. But I think this is kind of the guy that may really get us there. Obviously not alone. He said it best himself. He's a better coach when he has better players. And so the players are the guys who are going to be really taking it home and responsible for the success of this team. But in terms of guiding those guys to be successful on the field, both in terms of his own, coaching acumen, and then being able to build a competent and experienced staff that knows the importance of recruiting, that knows the importance of retention. I think the sky's the limit with this guy, and he just proved it again with the press conference today. The man loves football. That's all the man thinks about. And he understands that he's got a special situation here in Oregon. And I think that comes off every time he has a conference like this. So those were just some of the last overall thoughts I had, but I appreciate that.
Very well said. Yeah, the excitement just keeps building every time we talk to him, because more stuff has happened since the last time we talked to him.
Yeah, there's always some update to ask him about, and some intricacies and some, developments here and there on the trail. So it's always entertaining to talk to the guy. All
right. Well, as we say our final spiel here, Steven, where can people find more of you? And did you want to kind of tease kind of some stuff you have in the works for this last weekend?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, starting off, find me on Twitter, SB Sports 541. That is the best way to get at me right now. In terms of just direct communication, shoot me a follow. Would appreciate it. Working on getting a YouTube channel going. You guys will all be the first to know once I get that up. And then another thing, I would encourage all of you guys to check out the Ducks Digest forums. That is something that Max and I have a ton of fun with. I'm going to post another topic this evening about the running backs and how that kind of looks. But I really want to get your guys' opinions on that, because honestly, that's going to help us with ideas for the show. And so our favorite way of really figuring out content to talk about with you guys is what you're interested in and the fans' kind of perspective on things and around the program. And so I really would love to get your guys' input on the forums. I'm going to be posting that hopefully on a daily basis. So just keep your eye out for that. But Ducks Digest forums, I'll be posting stuff there. And really would love to get your guys' opinions.
Right on. Yeah, definitely check that out. It's been fun to kind of get some stuff there. I'll post some, more exclusive content if I get some scoop. I'm starting to do that over there. So particularly on the recruiting side of things. So definitely worth checking out Ducks Digest Forum. It's a free to sign up, but it's one of those ways that we're really starting to build the community here at Ducks Digest. One of the newer outlets here, here in the Oregon market. So that's how you guys can kind of tap in with Steven and, make sure you're in the loop with what he's doing and helping get him going with his following over on Twitter. If you want to find more of me, you can find me on Twitter at mtorresports. And you can also go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you guys are in the live stream right now. It only takes a second out of your day. It's free, and it is a tremendous help. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers, which is wild, but would really appreciate if you guys subscribe to the channel. And then go rate and review the Ducks Dish podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And then ducksdigest.com is where we're doing all our written stuff, typing things a million miles a minute. With days like today with this Dan Lanning press conference, having you guys covered. And then you can also find us on Instagram at Ducks Digest, Twitter at Ducks Digest, Facebook at Ducks Digest. Sign up for the free Ducks Digest newsletter. I mean, I'm getting fired up just saying that. We got a lot of stuff going on.
Yep.
And it has been a blast.
Yep. And then let me just piggyback off of that, guys. For anybody who's watching, go check out Max's YouTube channel and give it a subscribe. That's actually how I got to be a fan of this entire process here, is just watching Max's videos that he's got on there. It's incredible insight. You can do things like watch the entire Lanning presser like it was today. You get to hear all of the questions, all of his answers. It's really insightful stuff. Really awesome content. Like he said, he's incredibly close to 1,000 subscribers, but there's really, really awesome stuff there. So if you're a Duck fan and you want to get the scoop, but also just some really, spot on opinions and kind of a pulse on what's going on with the program, go out to Max's YouTube channel and give him a follow.
Appreciate that, Steven. All right, guys. Well, we're going to call it on this episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. If you're new to the podcast or the show, make sure to go check out all our previous work. And, we're getting excited to really get the Dan Lanning era going here, in Eugene at Oregon. There's going to be plenty to cover. So we got hoops coverage as well. Yep. We're kind of rambling at this point, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm Max Torres. That's Steven Blanchett, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.
Go Ducks.